Yeah, I see the PowerPoint screen, so you just have to put it in presentation mode, I think.
Yep.
Then we can see it, or I can.
Getting there. Okay, can you see that cover screen now?
Yep, looks great.
Right on. Okay, well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking me to talk to this conference about wildlife trees. I get a lot of the slide content in this. First off, is my sound okay?
No, there's somebody that's gonna.
What kind of a meeting is it?
Are we all muted?
Fine at this end.
I'm not sure.
That sounds better. Good. Okay. Yeah, wildlife trees in your woodlot. A lot of the content of the slides I'm going to present, hopefully I talk around 25-30 minutes, but I'm available to hang around after for questions for as long as you need. A lot of the slide content was developed by my past colleague, the Forest Management Guides biologist with Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, Dr. Brian Naylor. Some of you might recognize that name. He retired recently, and so he passed on a lot of his information and teachings on wildlife trees to me. And for a forester who spent a lot of time just looking on the ground, looking at regeneration, looking at soil conditions and silvicultural treatments, he definitely taught me to look up in the trees for cavities and wildlife activities. So yeah, it's been a interesting change in how I see the forest. So hopefully I can share some of that with you today. So it's my understanding the audience today are mostly private woodlot owners and potentially or maybe looking to harvest some trees for firewood or potentially maintaining your sugar maple, your sugar bushes as well. Some may use certified tree markers, but probably for the majority, most of you don't. So this presentation is kind of aimed towards determining to just discussing the different types of wildlife trees when you're planning these harvest activities and maintaining some of these trees on site that provide the best habitat opportunities for the wildlife in your woodlots. So there's three main checkpoints that you need to achieve when you're looking at trying to maintain wildlife habitat and biodiversity on your woodlot. And a lot of this presentation comes from the mandatory direction we have in the province's stand and site guide. Of course, that's mandatory on crown lands. Of course, not mandatory on your woodlots. But a lot of the slides and information here is based on what's required on crown land in your area. So practicing good silviculture, obviously a big checkpoint there. So using the appropriate treatments based on the tree species you have on the site and their shade tolerance. Protecting critical and sensitive habitats. So you could potentially have noticed nests and dens already that you've observed in your area, as well as if you have woodland pools or water features, so your lakes or your ponds or your rivers, protecting those habitats as well, very critical for maintaining biodiversity. And today we're going to talk about maintaining special features within your woodlot. So when I talk about special features, I'm actually talking about wildlife trees. So there are different types of wildlife trees that have that present a lot of importance to wildlife species around in the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence Forest, Kemptville area. And so we're going to cover a little bit about cavity trees, mass trees, scattered conifers, super canopy trees, and veteran trees. Cavity trees, we'll get into the slides on each one of these. All of these types of trees are something you should be keeping an eye out in your woodlot when you're looking to, if you're looking to decide what trees to leave. These are some of the trees that have a high importance for wildlife habitat. And of course, the more wildlife and you have on your site, the higher diversity you're going to be able to maintain. Here's just this illustration of a tree marked with a blue W. If you are working with certified tree markers, they tend to, or on crown land, they will mark the trees that need to be retained with the big blue W typically. So the first type of wildlife tree I'm going to talk to you about are cavity trees, and these are usually living trees with cavities or holes. You can see a couple of examples here. They are typically, from a silvicultural perspective, they would normally be removed in your cuts. They don't have a lot of high value. Usually they have significant defects, as you can see. They have holes in them, so the internal quality of those trees, potential stain and rot, definitely exists. So they tend to have low economic value, and in a way that works good because those trees with the low economic value sometimes have the highest wildlife value. So about 25% of the birds and mammals use these cavity trees for nesting and feeding or denning or some form of temporary shelter. And so they can either be naturally produced or they can be produced by excavators, for example, or woodpeckers that will excavate these holes in the trees. And they're used by a lot of different species. And eventually, because they have some internal rot and, of course, holes in them, they'll eventually become dead standing trees, and then which introduces another whole selection of wildlife species that use specifically dead trees. And then after that, eventually they'll fall to the ground. And about 40% of animals use trees lying on the ground for habitat, shelter, cover, etc. So a lot of use with these trees. So I guess you may wonder, well, how many trees should I be keeping in my woodlot? And so these numbers really here are based off our direction or guidelines in the stand and site guide for areas managed on crown land. And so obviously you don't have to achieve these, but just to kind of give you an idea, you want to aim for, try to aim for greater than 10 cavity trees per hectare. On average, in some areas, you may get a patch where you have a higher density. So you want to try, and it's on average. So you want to try maintain at least 5 on each hectare, so they're distributed spatially fairly well. Obviously, you don't want to leave trees that are going to have a safety concern. If you feel confident in assessing that, if you think they're going to fall on top of someone or fall on infrastructure, obviously that is something you take into account when retaining cavity trees. And of course, the larger trees are the better trees. And we'll get into as to why. But you're going to get a lot more species using a larger tree than, say, a smaller tree in the under canopy. And if you have the choice, we recommend that over 30 centimeters, 38 centimeters diameter is preferred. So not all cavities are of equal value, but we're going to spend some time take a look at what cavity trees are better than others. Tree, if you're out in your woodlot looking for these things, pileated woodpecker nest cavities. These are the best choices. These are the top high priority cavity trees. Pileated woodpeckers will typically excavate a cavity in large hardwood trees with advanced heart rot. You may see conchs, which are evidence of that heart rot within the tree. And they will excavate a fairly large entrance hole, sometimes 10 centimeters wide and a little taller. So your oval, as you see in the picture there, more oval shaped. And that leads into a chamber that's about half a meter, can be up to half a meter deep and 20 centimeters in diameter. So a fairly large in the tree. I think somebody's maybe unmuted there. Okay, we're back to normal. And so pileated woodpeckers will likely only use this cavity for nesting once, and the following year they'll go find another tree. They may use it for sleeping afterwards or resting at night. But the key and the importance with these is once they're abandoned, they become available, basically, prime real estate for the birds and mammals that use these to for house, like for shelter. They become prime real estate. So something will definitely take over those cavities fairly quickly after the woodpeckers finished using it. And because they're the largest cavities excavated by excavators, they can, of course, house the most diverse selection of wildlife species. So that's why they're the best choice. Best choice are your large hollow trees. So they usually, when I mean large, we're looking at over 38, 40 centimeters GBH. And they're actually really great choices when you have multiple holes excavated into them. And there's some species out there, chimney swifts and bats, that actually will look specifically for these hollow trees for nesting and nursing, particularly the bats. And so if you see these in your woodlot, they don't have a lot of economic value, but they have great potential for wildlife habitat use. So some good choices, kind of second on the list are other woodpecker nest cavities. And these could be excavated by the smaller woodpeckers, your hairy woodpecker or your yellow-bellied sapsucker. And you'll be able to identify these. The holes, the cavities are smaller, and they're still great choices. However, because they are smaller, they're not available to some of the larger species. And again, these woodpeckers will use them once, and then they become vacated for other species to use. Another really good choice are large natural nest or den cavities. So as opposed to an excavator, say a woodpecker excavating one, natural cavities also form. And that could be from wounding, past wounding, or natural decay. And the cavities, with a natural cavity, they must have a sound chamber and an entrance that keeps out the rain or snow. So not facing upwards is ideal. And so, of course, again, with the woodpecker cavities, bigger is better. Your bigger cavities are going to be available to a greater choices of wildlife. And so you should be trying to look for these and retain these on your woodlot if it is safe to do so, and it's not impeding with the overall objectives of what you want to do with that woodlot. Another good choice are small natural nest or Ordained cavities. And again, some of these may get difficult to see, but we'll cover some slides on how you may be able to better identify these. And some things you may be difficult to tell whether there is an apparent entrance hole. But if you can see callus tissue around the entrance, that's a good sign that the cavity has been used and is usable by wildlife. So as we go down the list of priorities, we get into some okay, you know, maybe these are your only choices, or you're in an area where in your woodlot, maybe you just don't have a lot of those cavity trees you're seeing. These are also good choices if this is kind of all you've got. So our feeding cavities and our escape cavities. So our feeding cavities are usually created by our woodpeckers. They're of course foraging sites, and they too also have a long-term value because those trees will eventually die. They'll be standing dead trees that provide a lot of habitat value, and eventually they will fall. And as I mentioned, trees on the ground have a lot of habitat value as well. So how can you tell a woodpecker nesting hole from a feeding hole? Well, nesting holes, and the pictures I showed before, are fairly round or oval and have very defined edges around the entrance, whereas feeding cavities can be irregular shaped and have very rough edges or rougher edges. And with some of the feeding cavities, you can actually see kind of the inside where the cavity, as deep as the cavity gets, whereas a nesting cavity will be fairly dark with inside. So you can see on the photograph on the left, those cavities are not very deep. So they don't, wildlife typically will not use that for nesting or denning, but they may use them for escape or for foraging. And you also see that the feeding holes are often clustered on the tree. And if you look at the two photos on the right, these are what we would consider escape cavities. So these provide temporary refuge. So a small mammal escaping a predator may use these for cover, but just short term. You can see the photo in the middle, not a lot of, not very deep, so wouldn't be used over the long term, but definitely have habitat value. And the photo on the right, you can see a natural cavity. However, it's facing upwards. And when I was talking about the rain and the snow coming in there, if you were trying to nest in there, it probably would not be a good site. Some other more poorer choices of cavity trees, but obviously if it's all you have, then it's better than nothing at all. So our nests, low nests or den cavities. And so cavities are generally most valuable when they're higher up in the tree, and that's simply because they're away from predators that would be on land. And these tree cavities at ground level, I have two examples here. So the tree on the left is a basal den cavity from old logging damage, and the tree on the right has a natural den cavity that is only about 1 meter off the ground. Again, these have value, but they're not the best choices. How do you find cavity trees? Like I said, I spend a lot more time looking up now, and it's amazing what you can see. But there are some clues that you know, once you get fairly familiar with doing this, you can get some good ideas of where you might think cavities may be higher up in the canopy. So you definitely need to be constant looking for these as you walk through your woodlot. And so potential trees, hardwood trees are more likely to contain cavities than conifers. Large diameter trees are also suitable. Your unacceptable growing stock if you're working with tree markers. So trees with lots of defects, or more than one defect. And also indicators of internal rot. So when I mentioned the conchs, those are usually visual indicators of what's going on inside the tree. So these are things that you can kind of use to assume that there may be some cavities that you just can't see up there. Again, using all your senses to find cavity trees. Watching and listening for birds. So if you're in your woodlot and you're seeing birds, where are they flying to? Where are they hanging around? Are they making sounds, warning sounds, any sounds that are out of particular? Or do you hear any sounds from the young that may be in that cavity, depending on the time of year you're in there? And you might also find cavities at the base of the chips that are excavated out of the cavity at the base of trees. Another good sign that there may be a cavity up there. So also mast trees are a type of wildlife tree that are of high value. And when we talk about mast trees, these are trees that produce nuts or berries, nuts being hard mast and berries being soft mast. Our hard mast trees, so our trees that produce nuts, are more important than the soft mast. And about 25% of the birds and mammals eat mast. And so this includes bears, deer, squirrels, mice, turkeys, grouse, wood ducks, and blue jays. I want to try and aim for, greater than 10 mast trees per hectare. Large trees are, of course, better. And why we want large trees, if this tree is part of the main canopy, its canopy is getting a lot of the sun, that means it's more productive at producing those fruits. So you want to look for large open canopies, deep canopies, anything that very healthy trees capable of maximum production. So your key mast tree species are, of course, your oaks, your beech, cherry, hickory, basswood, butternut, walnut, and ironwood. Ironwood being kind of the last choice. Ironwood tends not to get that large, so, and is a bit of a poor producer, but you keep it if basically you don't have any other better choices available. Oaks and beech were traditionally the best choices, but as I'm sure many of you know, beech is being decimated by beech bark disease. So if you have beech bark disease in your area, only keep healthy beech trees and follow your local direction. Scattered conifers also have a high habitat value. They're only used by about 10% of birds and mammals in hardwood stands, but they are kind of a niche for those species, and they provide refuge from wind and deep snow in winter for animals like deer and moose, and they also provide nesting sites for some birds like the black-throated green warbler during summer. So this bird species will specifically seek out usually hemlock to build their nests in. So again, a direction in the stand and site guide. I mean, you want to try and target this for some numbers greater than 10. Maintain greater than 10 conifers per hectare, of course, only if they're available. Again, larger is better, and you would want to have preference for your long-lived species. So hemlock tends to be the top species for scattered conifer. Balsam fir, if you have it, and again, and pine, cedar. Cedar is also a good species, but hemlock really is that top species. And they want to, of course, you want to try and keep ones that are gonna stay there for a while. So have low risk and high vigor. Also, super canopy trees have very high habitat value for many wildlife species. And when I talk about super canopy trees, I'm sure you've all seen, as a picture on the right here, like a white pine tree towering high above the main canopy. These are, monster trees. Usually, if you see them from the air, they're sticking out quite a bit. And these, of course, can be rare in situations, a little bit more frequent in others, depending on what site you're on. But they provide important habitat for a handful of species, including large birds of prey. So I'm sure many of you probably seen bald eagles tend to build their nests on the tops of these large trees. They also tend to perch there for prey. Our brown creeper, the small the bird there pictured there, will basically run up and down the bole of a tree, and they tend to find the insects in the very rough bark of white pine. The larger trees have that rough bark, and there's lots of insects that will basically hide in those crevices, and the brown creeper will go up and down and feed on these insects, and that's how they find. So of course, those larger diameter trees, they have to spend less time flying from tree to tree to get their food source. So big rough bark trees have high value for brown creepers, and of course black bears use them as refuge sites. I have a couple pictures of 2 or 3 cubs that I've seen over my time out in the bush, just camped out high up in white pine trees. So the mother will tend to send the cubs up there for protection while she forages. And again, these trees also, even from a biodiversity and habitat perspective, they also have a high aesthetic appeal for many people. So, again, when you have them, try and maintain 1 tree for every 4 hectares. Again, these are pretty big trees. They're greater than 60 centimeters TBH are the best ones here. You can see in the picture here, this would have been a tree marker that's marked 1, super canopy. Keep this. You can see the deep furrows in the bark. Quite a bit of habitat value to these. And you're going to want to try and maintain those long-lived species, the ones that'll be there for a while. So your white pine, your hemlock, and your yellow birch. These species here have life expectancies of up to 300 years. Quite common. So how many wildlife trees per hectare? And I've kind of gone over this throughout the slides. And this is, of course, when available. This is something you should be trying to target or at least work towards. So 10 cavity trees per hectare, 10 mass trees per hectare, 10 scattered conifers per hectare, and one super canopy every 4 hectares. So that's about 30 wildlife trees per hectare, but all targets are subject, of course, to that caveat when available. Most hardwoods stands should have an average of at least 10 cavity trees per hectare. When you start looking for these things, you'll actually start finding quite a few of them. And for some of these trees, like 1 tree can count for multiple wildlife tree types. For example, a large healthy beech tree with a sapsucker nest hole would count as a cavity tree and a mass tree. And a huge pine tree would count as a super canopy tree and a scattered conifer. So, but of course, that's how we would do it on Crown land. But yeah, you can single trees can count for multiple values. But you want to try and have that average somewhere between 10 and 30 wildlife trees per hectare on average. So that we're on timing here. It's not too bad. Are there any questions?
That was great, Jody. Thanks. Oh, I'm just going to take my video off. Yeah, great pictures. That makes it always so much more enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, nobody likes looking at words.
And it just really shows the great work that you as a forester is doing in terms of conserving biodiversity and how it plays the bigger picture of sustainable forest management. It's really neat to see your hands-on experience doing that. So thank you.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions starting to come in. The first one was our silver poplar or white poplar used by native species for food or nesting. That's from Rob.
The silver. So let me just unshare my screen here. That might help. I can see. Sometimes I like to read the questions. Chat.
Sure. So silver white poplar, that's I'm trying to remember the Latin word. Maybe it's not so common up where you are. But,
used by our. Yeah. So poplar's a really good cavity tree. Has good cavity tree potential. Poplar tends to be more of a short-lived species, so it suffers from a lot of heart rot, decay fairly early on in its life. And up here in Thunder Bay, we have a lot of poplar, and those are our prime cavity trees up here. Poplar tends to be a smaller percentage of the composition around in the Kemptville area, but again, it still has its purpose, susceptible to heart rot, and that's really where those pileated woodpeckers and those. Well, I'm not sure how they can sense it. Maybe they see the conchs, or when they start drilling into the tree, they can feel that heart rot, that weakness in the tree, and so. Yeah, definitely they would be used by the cavity excavators. So the second question, one of the first slides mentioned veteran trees. Could you elaborate on those? Yeah, so I guess I did mention in the first slide I listed veteran tree as a wildlife tree type, and I figured most of the woodlot owners, I'm thinking you're more into the hardwood stands where you would be doing your selection harvest. And so the stand and site guide on Crown land doesn't have much direction for veteran trees in selection harvest, but in shelterwood harvest, we want to again maintain 10 veteran trees per hectare on average. And when I'm talking about veteran trees are basically the baby super canopy trees. So they're trees in waiting to become super canopy trees. They tend to be white pine. Again, they tend to be those species, those long-lived species capable of becoming those super canopy trees. Because eventually those super canopy trees will die and will fall down. And so over the long term, you want to keep that supply on your woodlot. So you want to keep those up and coming super canopy trees in your woodlot.
And just Jody, before you go on to the next question, just a reminder to everybody, there's a little smiley icon down on the bottom of the screen beside the record button. And if you click on that, the top option is to raise your hand. So again, if you would rather ask a question verbally, you can do that, and I'll keep an eye out for your raised hand, and then we can go there and unmute yourself. So just a reminder about that.
I see someone's hand up. Do you want to jump in right now, or
See, I don't see that. So
Danielle
you can see
LeBlanc?
that.
Yeah, I've got many hemlocks. Some of them are 1.5 to 2 feet, sometimes 2.5 feet diameter.
Right.
Diameter breast height, and they are more or less climax trees, and they last for long. I haven't seen many trees, cavity holes in these trees, but are they good? Could they be good trees to keep? And another question, a second question would be, I often find trees, cavities in trees who are multiple branch or multiple stem. There are 2 or 3 branches or 2 or 3 stems, and one of them as a whole. And I was tempted to cut that branch or that stem, but now I leave them there because there's a hole in it, and it could be good for wildlife.
Yeah, yeah. So answer your first question about the hemlock, for sure. That sounds like those hemlock would actually, you'd check mark that super canopy tree with those, and you'd also check those scattered conifer objectives as well. And if you have a stand of them, you could have deer wintering in those areas. It depends on the size of your hemlock stand, but definitely if the economic value or it's not impeding on your long-term plans of what you want to do with your woodlot, those are definitely high priority stems to retain, to keep standing for their wildlife habitat value. And the second question, if you have a forked trees, I mean, yeah, I tend to find that those really gnarly trees out there with branches and stems and holes and rot, and those tend to be the ones you want to keep. So yeah, if you're choosing between a forked stem low at the base, take a look up. If there's cavities in one and on the other, then that can help you choose which one to keep and which one to take.
Thank you.
So I'll go back to the questions here. What is the future of the bear populations in areas that are away from water? I don't have an answer to that question right now, but I can definitely get back to you on that one.
I should have mentioned that I'm specifically talking about beach bug disease.
Sorry, you were breaking up there?
I should have mentioned that I'm talking specifically about areas where there's beach bug disease.
Away from the water?
Yeah, 'cause then they would have no access for salmon, for instance.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I know bears do within intolerant hardwood stands away from water. Obviously, I mean, fish maybe some of their food supply, but as I mentioned, actually, and I can't think specifically what the percentage is in some of these upland hardwood stands, but they do rely heavily on these mast trees. So the fruit from the oak and the beech. Geez, I'm trying to think of what percentage of their food supply, but it's fairly high.
And stuff like that. Yeah.
Are these numbers of trees also applicable to the boreal mixedwood forest? So the boreal mixedwood forest is, of course, different forest type. Much younger forest tends to be disturbed by fire fairly frequently, every 100, 120 years. And from the stand and site guide perspective, we have not completely different number requirements. In a boreal situation, we're looking for 25 wildlife trees per hectare. Up in the boreal, we tend to clear cut a lot more, so we're not doing our selection or shelterwood harvest. So we tend to remove most of those trees because we're trying to emulate that significant disturbance that a wildfire would create. So we're trying to open it up and allow those the jack pine and the poplar that require that full sunlight to regenerate. So we're opening up. So we're looking for 25 trees per hectare, and 10 of those trees ideally are over 25 centimeter DBH. And those trees over the larger trees, we really try and target the cavity trees, again, the scattered conifers, your super canopy trees. We don't, of course, in the boreal, the trees aren't as big, so the size requirements are a little less based on what's available. The stand and site guide, if you're interested, is available online on the Ontario website. Just Google it, and you can see what the requirements are in the boreal. So you talk about habitat piles potential. Maybe I need some clarification on that. Piles as in, it says Bettina.
Sorry, that wasn't my question, but mine's the next one down. But I'm
okay.
talking about leaving those large brush piles that are excellent for wildlife.
Right. It's funny, we were just talking about how my colleague actually Brian Naylor did retire, but we recently hired a new biologist, and she lives in Timmins, and how she was getting wood for her wood stove, and she found a snake nest in her wood pile, and we kind of got to joking that, so there is some habitat value with those some of the what we would call slash or wood debris piles. Sometimes you see at the roadside. Again, there is some habitat value with those. However, from an aesthetic point, they're kind of eyesores too as well. So we have some aesthetic concerns from society that we have to deal with, that we tend to try and sometimes we will burn them or make sure that they're spread out across the harvested area so that they become that coarse woody material out on the landscape. Okay, are there any silvicultural benefits to maintaining wildlife trees? For example, predators for pest species? Definitely, I can think of wildlife trees that would provide seed source. For sure, wildlife trees would you double check. For sure, you'd have the wildlife habitat value, but you'd also have the seed value. Specifically in shelterwood, or where you're maintaining these conifer trees, white pine, and providing the seed that would fall down underneath. Maintaining those trees for a seed supply for the future stand coming up underneath has a high value from a silviculture perspective. Okay, where are we? In my question about bears, I should have mentioned that this applies to areas with beech bark disease. Okay, yeah. So beech bark disease, again, as I mentioned, is taking out a lot of the food supply, beech nuts that bears would rely on, and they are fairly. I would like to think, and I am not a biologist, but I do know a bit that they are capable of changing their food requirements. And beech bark disease is, there's diseases that do go through stands, and wildlife have evolved to changing their food supply. So if you have beach that look relatively healthy, you try and maintain them where you can. But I know, and it varies, managing beach bark disease, I think, does vary at a local level, and I'm not 100% familiar with how it's managed in the Kemptville area, the Pembroke area, but probably something that I could look into with the Pembroke District MNRF folks. And again, that places even heavier kind of reliance on those other species. So your oak, your basswood, if you have those species, retain them in areas where you have beach bark disease. Let's see here. Okay, what can I do in a pine plantation that is about 30 years old to add biodiversity? So, when you're looking at these young regenerating stands, I agree, I definitely agree. There's not a lot of biodiversity, but they still have habitat value. And maybe not right at the stand level, but if you have some of these areas of pure pine, people may say, you know, oh, there's no diversity in here. But you look at more at a landscape level. If you're up in a jet and you see across the landscape, there are definitely wildlife species, and maybe a smaller percentage that use these types of habitats for survival. I think it's always good to have these on the landscape so that you have it spread out. And that you're providing from a landscape level, you're providing more of a diverse landscape. You have some areas with these pines. It's the exact opposite to scattered conifers. If you have some hardwood species in there, when you get into the tree markers who take the certified tree markers who take the tree marking course, also one of the things they want to look for in these pine plantations, if you have hardwood species, try and retain those isolated hardwood species in those pine plantations. Again, at 30 years, you may think that they're not very diverse. It's just given the stage of succession they're in right now, they don't have as much habitat value as, say, an adjacent stand that's 100, 120 years old. But the wildlife species are adapted to moving from stand to stand, or site to site, area to area, based on what stage they're in. And you have to understand that a 30-year-old pine plantation is going to become a 60, 80, 100-year-old pine plantation eventually. So from a long-term perspective, you are providing future biodiversity in that stand. Any tree suggestions for barn swallows? Well, that's a good question. I do know in the stand and site guide, we provide direction for species at risk. Barn swallow is considered a species at risk in Ontario, and but we actually find the barn swallows are actually building in a forestry setting. They're building their nests under bridges, or they're building nests in the kind of these steep drop-offs in soil. So if you see it where a river has eroded, a slope side where you have exposed mineral soil, that's where the barn swallows tend to be nesting. So they're not necessarily associated with trees, but actual landscape attributes. So actually, if they're going to nest, they're going to be nesting on the bridges, or they're going to be nesting in these basically steep slope side exposed soil situations. Brush piles, okay, we covered that. How to structure for different wildlife. how to structure brush piles. So we tend to, yes, large brush piles. What is the best design? I would say, I guess brush piles with, I would say clean brush piles. So brush piles not mixed in with a lot of dirt and other debris would be best. So they would be able to provide those cavity opportunities for, say, snakes, hibernacula, probably would provide the best. So in the north, we like to say fluffed. They're fluffed, but that's more so that they burn well. But I would say piles, I wouldn't say larger is better. I would think they would only use the external area of those piles. But again, kind of beyond my knowledge on how some of the wildlife use those piles. But I wouldn't say a large pile is any better than a smaller pile, because I would think the surface area would be key. And then whether they can actually, get into these piles. If you have a lot of debris, a lot of soil mixed in with those, probably not as much value. Habitat.
Sorry, just before we carry on, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's 1 o'clock and some people might have to get going. So I just we can continue on with questions though, which is great, and thank you for offering to do so. There's still some more to answer, and I suspect that some people want to stick around. But for those that do have to leave, thank you so much for taking part today. And I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the sponsors, contribution from our sponsors, which include the Ontario Woodlot chapters, SD&G, Renfrew County, and Lower Ottawa Valley chapter. And then Leeds and Grenville County, Vitamin Forest Service, the Ontario Maple Syrup Association, Leeds and Grenville Stewardship Council, Forest Stewardship Council, the City of Ottawa, the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, the South Nation Conservation Authority, Forest Ontario, and finally the Invasive Species Centre in a partnership with Ontario Trillium Foundation. So thank you again to our sponsors and for everyone that participated today. And again, for those who want to stick around for more questions, please feel free to do so.
Okay.
Back to you.
I'll continue on through the questions here. Habitat piles to address gypsy moth, predator species in particular. So there's quite a few insectivore bird species that will feed on the gypsy moth. Habitat piles, I'm not, depends on the actual bird species and whether they're cavity nesters or exposed nesters. Not sure how to answer that question, whether the piles actually have a habitat value. Could look into it though. Are there any benefits for wildlife to keep broken branches? I mean, big branches, so greater than 20 centimeters DBH, up 5 to 15 meters, and at least 90 degrees resting in neighboring trees. I tend to cut them with lots of precautions, but now I wonder if they're beneficial for wildlife. So that's definitely something you're probably wondering now, yeah. I say if you have some large branches and they're fairly exposed, when you expose that wood, you're exposing it to pathogens that will come in and create that rot. And of course, that's what's going to bring in those primary excavators. I say primary excavators, those are your woodpeckers that actually create the excavations. And then when I say the secondary excavator users, those are the kind of the guys who like want their house built, so they just move right in. Those are your non-woodpeckers. Yeah, so they are of course attracted to the rot that may be created. So I would say, yeah, it has a higher potential to create that rot that some of those woodpeckers may be looking to use to excavate their cavities. Again, as you mentioned, up here we call them widow makers. So again, I'm going to trust that safety precautions better than I do, but yes, as I mentioned, if it's going to be a safety, I think of a big gnarly tree with a large branch coming out the side that has a high risk of falling. Definitely take care of yourself first, and I'm sure there are other places for the wildlife to find shelter and nesting sites. Says who support white-footed mouse population. Okay, are there broken branches? Could you mention any avoidance measures that should be taken to protect species at risk, such as species at risk bat species that may be roosting during the day, or especially when they are raising young between mid-May and end of July? So that's a very timely question. We are currently revising our stand and site guide right now, and we actually are in the process of developing some new direction for bat hibernacula and roosting trees, and I mean that's another whole presentation, but that I'd love to talk to you about. But my colleague Dana Kinsman, she's our species at risk biologist. But in general, what we're trying to prescribe on Crown land is if you see these large trees with loose bark, or potential, usually they're large, rough bark, large pieces of the bark kind of falling off, and the bat will come in underneath and use the space in between for habitat. So if you see these large trees, dying trees, or the hollow trees, definitely high potential for, if you have bats in the area, they may be using these trees. So if you suspect a tree is being used, then I would recommend trying not to conduct those operations during their critical nesting period. So you're between your mid-May and end of July, if you can. If not, potentially leaving, I think maybe a 20 or 30 meter reserve around that specific tree if you suspect it's being used. If you're doing operations, leave that area directly adjacent so that you're not disturbing them. Our Ontario certified, sorry, trying to find my mouse here. There we are. Our Ontario certified tree markers also assessing for hazard tree potential. Big rotten aspen are great wildlife trees, but can be dangerous near trails, etc. Yes. Tree markers are definitely looking for these things. A large component of the training that they take are on identifying wildlife trees, and they're tested fairly heavily on it. I took the tree marking course a couple of years ago, and definitely a great program in terms of identifying these cavity trees and the trees to retain. So typically, and this will be identified on Crown land, where harvest operations are taking place, and you have an extraction trail. Typically, operators, the forest management plan for that area will specify that specifically for safety reasons, if there are trees directly adjacent to those trails that might cause a risk for forest workers or anybody else going in afterwards dealing with the regeneration, that those trees are removed within a certain distance of the trails. So it'll depend area to area whether there's restrictions or not, but definitely it is something they look at. So thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Where did my mouse go again? Here it is. Regarding bar Point Bird Observatory has built an open-sided roof structure, which is attracting the swallows. Yeah, I've heard of that elsewhere, and I believe in the direction for barn swallows, because it is a species at risk, if you are actually, and I did mention sometimes they will build their nests on the bridges or the water crossings. If you are replacing that water crossing, some of the direction is that you will provide a kind of a temporary structure that hopefully they would move into. I haven't had any luck with bat houses. Are there any trees or ways to encourage more bats to reside in our woodlot? So, yeah, again, I had mentioned those bark, high potential, the large hollow trees, high potential. So you get into, think of the trees large, like white pine. Sometimes when they're starting to die, the bark will slough off. Balsam fir, again, those big sheets of bark definitely have the highest potential. I would encourage you to keep those trees on your woodlot. I have a larger bat house and attracted bats in the first year. Put something under it to look for poop. The poop are very obvious, and they have well, that's great. Yeah, definitely great. Thank you, Asher. Thanks for the excellent. Stay safe, everyone.
Or observant.
Sorry, what was that?
So maybe Jean, were you about to ask a question? Yourself on mute.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions out there?
Oh, someone's got
Yep.
Daniel.
Daniel. Yep.
We can't hear you though. You have to unmute yourself. I can unmute you though here, I think.
Okay, now,
There.
okay. With the elms and the butternuts and the ashes dying or dead or dying, I've got many ashes, butternuts and elms with peeling bark or chicot, we'll call it in French, dead trees.
Yep. Right. Yep. Yep.
Are these worth keeping, and are they good for the wildlife? These
Yeah.
trees.
I would say they definitely have some wildlife value. And the bats, actually, even that brown creeper, kind of a bird of concern, not quite a species at risk, but we're finding some lower numbers of the brown creeper out there, and they actually will go in underneath the bark and nest there as well. That's where they'll build their nests. So for sure, if you have them and they don't provide and they aren't a safety risk, for sure, they'd be high priority to retain.
Okay. And the other question or mention, I have humid area, and I have a lot of black ash, white ash, yellow birch, some butternuts near that humid area. So I try to keep them, these trees, the butternuts, the ashes, and the yellow birch, as I try to keep them close to the humid area.
Yep.
So because there's more biodiversity in humid areas, and I hope that, like, I don't know, the fruits, not the fruits, but the let's say the fruits of the yellow birch or the fruits of the dying elms or the ashes, are they good for wildlife? So I think they are, but I mean, am I right?
Yeah, so they're seed. Most of those you mentioned are seed producers, and of course, definitely would provide seed for birds.
And if I may add, the other benefit I thought of it is these trees are used as perch trees for the
Right.
for the booze. I don't know the name in English, but the not the eagles, but smaller,
Yeah.
a bit smaller than these. They use it a lot. I mean, to even owls sometimes to
Yes, yeah. So your
scour
hawks.
around and look for mouses or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, definitely your hawks. Yeah, anywhere where, and I mean that especially you get that value even in the clear cut situations where we're looking at the 25 stems per hectare. A lot of those preying birds, the larger birds, hawks and hawks and eagles are using those trees, those branches for perches to look for predators.
Yep.
Okay, are there any other questions out there? Doesn't look like it. Oh, okay. I guess that's it for today.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great, Jody. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. That was really super.
Yeah.
Really interesting stuff. People love to hear about animals and wildlife. So
Well, yeah.
yeah, it's no politics are involved, so it's always it's a nice.
Well, that's right. And I mean, yeah, if it was my recommendation, just try and keep a little bit of everything, and you should have a good diversity of species covered.
Yeah, that's a great message. Thank you so much. And again, everybody, this will be posted up on our website for those of you who missed any of it and want to watch it again, or if you want to send it along to anybody to watch and invite them to check it out. And keep track. We've got 2 more series coming next Wednesday and the Wednesday after. So stay tuned for those. And thanks again, Jody.
Yeah, no problem. Enjoyed it. Anytime.
Enjoy the rest of the week, everyone. Getting some thumbs up there. I don't know if you see them.
Yeah. I saw some clapping.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't see anyone sleeping, so.
Yeah, definitely no sleeping.
Okay, talk to you later, Astrid.
Yeah. See you later.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Thank you.
Great job, Astrid. That went very well. Thank you.
Oh, there you are, Jim. Yeah, thanks. That went well, eh? I thought that was really neat. That was really interesting.
It was good. I lost sound for a bit. I think it was just my bandwidth.
Oh, really?
Just not too long. But anyways, it was really good.
Okay.
It gave me some ideas.
Did you get lots of people asking
No.
for help?
No, I only got one person, and I think they were able to connect. I never heard back from them, so I think it was okay.
Okay. And what was my sound like at the beginning? I didn't.
Oh, just yeah. There was just one gentleman. I did send him in a chat directly and asked him to turn it off, and as soon as he turned it off, it was good. It was just feedback.
Yeah, and so when you're co-host, you can't mute all? Can you do that?
Well, let me just check.
You were
when I'm co-host, I can mute all. But if I mute all, I would have muted you as well. And
yeah, so I did with Jody now. I did use that function, and I was worried at first that it would mute her, but it didn't. So I don't know if that's because she was down as presenter. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a way that I could. Just didn't want to screw around with that.
Yeah.
So,
That's what I did last week too. I was too nervous about. It's a tough call to do. Do you keep everybody muted for the whole thing? But it's nice to be able to ask the questions at the end, I find. So.
Yeah, I think there was a good balance there. And like I said, I forget who the gentleman's name was, but as soon as he muted, he got rid of the feedback. So
Okay, good. Okay, so you could actually hear everything and did you see the pictures?
I did. Yeah.
I'll
It's
send you a collage.
yeah. I must be. Are you creeping me on some kind of like? How did you get the picture of Laura and I?
I'll let you figure out where it is.
I don't
It's
know.
funny because I did a search for the
Christy
last
Lake.
time I did this. No, I was there. I took the picture.
Oh. Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
I'll send it to you.
Gatineau Lake, Gatineau River.
Gatineau River, yeah.
Yeah. It's okay. Good. I think my hair looked okay. It was important.
Thankfully you're wearing a hat there. So
Oh, that's true.
covered it up.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks a lot, Asher. That was not necessary. Very nice.
Well, the board, we all wanted to do something that acknowledged you in front of the public, at an event. So, yeah, and we chose this one as being sort of the best one that we get some people that, but now people know that you're officially retiring. I think most of that, your certification group knows. They've known for a bit, so.
Say that again. I didn't hear.
The certification group knows, like the members know. So.
And I let today I let Elaine know with FSC.
Okay.
It's because I had a survey to do for highly hazardous chemicals. So I did that, and then that kind of triggered my memory. I said, "Oh, I should let them know." So.
Yeah, and that's actually really good because I started sharing yesterday the job application.
Yeah.
As well. So I saw that Monica Patel saw it on LinkedIn, so from FSC. So it's good to
Yeah.
They're kind of like.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Just a knowing. Not should I figure it out or whatever, but it's nice to.
No, it's good. It's good for them to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just signed up a new member today, by the way. 400 acres.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I still have to do a few cross the T's and dot the I's on the MOU, but I don't know. I would assume in a few days it'll be on our database and up and running. So then we got to get an email, an invoice to them. Make sure that's done as well. Okay.
Awesome. That's good. Is it. I guess it's not. Yeah, we're not going to announce every single one. I guess. Typically.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
But it's nice to let the board know that we're keeping going. So, like an updates and stuff.
And then I've got in about 40 minutes, I've got a video chat with Kevin Predden about his FMP. So I'll do that. Pardon me.
Have a cup of coffee first.
Okay. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.
Okay. See you, Jim. Bye.
Bye-bye.